It's a good sense to introduce a little bit the character we'll be talking about. We're honored to have tonight, bienvenue tout le monde, online as well as here in the salle, Lionel Barber, the author of this fantastic book, Gambling Man. We have the gambling table set up outside. No, that's not allowed, I'm afraid. We'd have to do this in Monaco, which maybe we should. But it's a great pleasure to welcome Lionel to Paris, to Asia Society. This book has not been published in the United States yet, which is a rare occasion for us here in Europe to get a sneak preview of something, which I think they had some political event happening, which apparently delayed, which is normal. Nothing will come out in that period. But we're excited that you'll be in New York with Asia Society in January when it is published. But so this is a sneak preview for those of you here in France and at Asia Society. So we're very grateful for you to make it here to Paris. My name is Duncan Clark. I'm the co-chair of Asia Society France, and I'd like to thank our team for putting this event together, including many people joining us online from Asia Society, also our partner, the Comité d'échange économique, sorry, I got the France-Japon. Welcome, those online as well, and ESSEC, who are also joining us. So without further ado, Lionel, this was a fantastic book. He's a difficult person to write about. I think firstly, it's a very long history. I mean, the guy's, I guess now he's in his 60s, but he said, I mean, he's been at it a long time.
Yeah, more than 40 years, and you've got a little snapshot of Masa there, which is 60% of what he says is true.
I think so. That's why I wanted to put that clip up.
Yeah, we can go through maybe where we're... But you also got a sense of the man's warmth, and he's so un-Japanese. He's a showman. He's a great salesman, and he uses those powers of persuasion to persuade people to give him boatloads of money to take gigantic risks. And he was the richest man in the world for 3 days in February 2000. And then he lost 96% of his wealth, and he keeps coming back. And he's smiling now. He wasn't smiling when I first interviewed him back in 2023. In February, he was frowning because he's now making his 5th comeback. Maybe we can talk about that.
Absolutely. I mean, I think to understand his grit, you have to also understand his gritty background. And as you described, he's an ethnic Korean. And of course, Asia Society is present across Asia. We have a center in Seoul. We have a center in Tokyo, Hong Kong, Manila. But, you know, the Japan-Korea relationship, which we've actually done well in, I think, recently. We have good centers working well together. Relatively recent, of course, we know the tragic history of the area. But Koreans in Japan face a very tough start in life, particularly his parents and his grandparents.
Yeah, I got some excellent advice. How many names am I allowed to drop?
Oh, tonight is all about name dropping. Barack Obama once said, no, I'm not going to drop his name. Donald Trump once told me, never drop names.
Yeah. Well, I did ring up Walter Isaacson, he's not a close friend, but he wrote the great biography of Steve Jobs. And I thought, if I'm going to write a serious biography, ring up Walter and ask him one piece of advice. And he said, focus on the formative years. Yeah. Don't go for all the noise of the Softbank Vision Fund. Everybody kind of knows that. They don't know the formative years. And also, this is where character is formed. So just to tell briefly the story, Masa's grandfather left Korea in 1917. Economic opportunity. Korea was at that point obviously part of Imperial Japan. I mean, it was a colony. And he went over to work in a coal mine, then became a farmer. Masa's father was born in 1936. Devastation of Second World War. They went back to Korea, but they were rejected by their relatives. And so they went back then to Japan, and they had to start all over again. They were in a slum by the railway station in Tosu in Kyushu. And Masa is born in 1957. Now, key point. He spent a bit of time in the slum, but not a lot. Because by the time he's 6, 7, his father, who started as a bootlegger, and then as a loan shark, then goes into pachinko, starts making a lot of money. So Masa's by this time a princeling. He's got ambitions. And he crucially decides to go to America for his education, to learn English. But also because his father tells him you can't be a teacher. He wanted to be a teacher. But because he was Korean, living under a Japanese alias, his other name was Matsumoto. I'll try and get this right. Do a Trump. He lived under an alias, Yasumoto. Goes to California, studies at Berkeley, economics, and that's when he starts his first business.
And so, hello. So he did arrive, in Korea. Sorry, he arrived, at Berkeley. I mean, he's clearly very bright because he got promoted within the class pretty quickly. He's also a bit of a shyster, right? I mean, in terms of his first business venture, and I wrote about this a bit in the book that I wrote about Alibaba because I had to understand a bit about Masa. It wasn't necessarily, but the professor that he worked with doesn't have, and you still met him, I think he's in his 90s now. He didn't have many good things to say about Masa back then.
Yes. I went to Berkeley just as COVID was finishing in order to track down Masa's first business partner, whose name was Dr. Forrest Moser. He's a nuclear particle physicist from Nebraska. Now, anybody who knows America is people from Nebraska, they're pretty straight up. They're not from New York, they're not from LA, they're from Nebraska, that's the Midwest. Anyway, I tried to find him. I sent him an email. By this time, by the way, he's 92. And I walked around the campus. I'd been a visiting scholar at Berkeley in 1992 at the end of my time as Washington correspondent for Financial Times. And I stupidly thought that all the doors would be open to me. I got nowhere. So I went back to my hotel room feeling really low and thinking, you've failed. You've got nowhere. So what do you do? Well, I thought I'm going to use LinkedIn and I'm going to try and track down a Moser. And sure enough, I found a Todd Moser in his early 60s who's a software developer in the Bay Area. And I thought that must be his son. So I sent him a message. And he said, oh, gee, I thought Pops had, he was going to see you, sent you an email. No. So I said, give me his phone number. He did. So I phoned him up. Hello? And I said, well, it's Lionel Barber. And, oh, I thought I'd send you the email. No. So he said, can I come around tomorrow because I'm leaving San Francisco? And he said, sure. He said, just give me 2 words to describe Masayoshi Son. So I said, can I have 4? I said, reckless gambler, would-be visionary. He said, how about just crook? And the reason was, this is all in the book, it's never been told before, is essentially the physicist had developed a speech synthesizer, now the kind of thing that they're all using in Japan with Google Translate. And Masa went behind his back to sign contracts with Japanese consumer electronics company for this product, but didn't give him any money and didn't tell him how much money he got. So Moser, who I just saw 2 months ago, age 95, he's still going strong.
Well, we need it for the online, but yeah. Okay, I'll use this for now. We could try. No, sorry about that. So as you start out the book, how to become somebody when you're born a nobody, that does inspire a lot of people to read about this story. But as you said, he started in a very difficult position. Even his parents and grandparents were obviously much more difficult, but he was sort of on his way. But still, still to this day, if you're Korean, ethnic Korean in Japan, you are treated a bit differently. But to what point is that his advantage in Japan?
Oh, I don't think there was any advantage other than being an outsider gave him the motivation to do well, to make it. Is this okay? Sorry. Close. okay, okay, how is this? I'm supposed to know how to do this, but anyway. Anyway, the crucial point is that Masa is an outsider. He's not trusted by the large sections of the Japanese business establishment because he doesn't make anything. He's not a steel maker or a car maker. He's in technology. He's one of these venture capital people, financial engineer. He doesn't make anything. So what is he really doing? Where does he get his money? But he's also Korean. And one of the most shocking experiences that I had, and believe me, this book was very hard. Duncan, you were very generous in pointing me in some directions regarding the China episode when he invested in Alibaba. But I tried to get into corporate Japan. Several doors open. I got there in the end, but it was really hard. And one gentleman, who shall remain nameless, he kept ignoring me. So I cornered him at an international conference and said, "Can I see you next time I'm in Japan?" So he said he was busy. So I said, "Okay, it's all right. Just tell me, what would be the one question you would ask Masayoshi Son?" And this guy, who's very successful, he looked at me and said, "Ask Masa why he hates Japan so much." I don't think that's true. I think Masa's got a gigantic chip on his shoulder, which he kind of uses as motivation, but I don't think he hates Japan, and he's been a generous beneficiary, especially after the earthquake, gave a lot of money away, so to be discussed.
You can't have two people talking, that's great. So in the book you describe also that he's been a bit of a bridge to the US. You'd often have, and this is the case still today, that Americans and foreigners visiting Japan after 2 or 3 days of working through interpreters, it is a refreshing thing. And I think, by the way, Jack Ma played a similar role in China, that somebody who's an individual who can connect you, who can talk directly, even though I'd say Son's English is not as fluent as Jack's, but as a person, he spent a lot of time in the US, he's built a lot of friendships there. So he's been a bridge to the US, even if domestically he's faced some resistance. His power, to some extent, is bringing Americans there.
I think this is really crucial to understand his success, that he had English, and he goes back to Japan in 1981 after 6 years, almost 6 years in California. So he did that partly because his family said, "You've got to come back." But he understood how to be a bridge. His first business is software distribution, and he's networking already in the early 80s. By the mid-80s, he's going to the Comdex trade fair, and he's bumped into Steve Jobs. He's bumped into Bobby Kotick, Bill Gates. By the way, he did not bring Bill Gates to Japan. Nishi did, Kazuki. I mean, that's the sort of slight illusion. I interviewed Bill Gates. Bill Gates was very clear that he'd never want to depend solely on Masa as his distributor. And he had a relationship with ASCII. But on the other hand, he said, Gates said, it was so wonderful meeting somebody who actually could speak English, because normally you go to Japan, I think we all know this, especially if you come from the West or America or England, and you get there and you're totally polaxed with jet lag, you can't understand a word, and they want to drink into the evening, and everything is just totally foreign. So when you got this little guy like Masa, who's chirping away in semi-Californian, it's helpful. But he did that really well, and he played on that, and he built a network of contacts in the tech area. So after the bubble, I'm sort of crunching history here, when the bubble collapsed, Masa pivots to America. He has a strong yen, and he's willing to use currency arbitrage, low interest rates, crucial, and he borrows in yen, strong yen, and buys in dollars, and buys pretty good assets.
He's had his share of good luck. I mean, obviously buying, I think, Ziff Davis, which took him into Yahoo, and then later seeing the strong value of the dollar, that really saved him, actually, because he's also been prone to borrow a lot of money. throughout his career. He's a gambling man, and he's betting everything on the table. You describe at one point he wants to have a chip on every square on the table, and it becomes increasingly almost delusional, I think, as we get into the Vision Fund. But go back to the very beginning. I mean, it's interesting, and I saw some parallels with the Jack Ma story as well. There's sort of a membrane between sort of incredible self-confidence and slash making things up, right? Being a make-believe world. So his story when he founded his first company, when he had, I think, 2 employees, where he stands on a table of, I don't know, tangerine boxes, because he's from Kyushu, where Satsuma comes from, right? But apparently that story may not be original, right?
And Mr. Honda has the same story. And by the way, Bill Gates, he says that he picked up a copy of Popular Electronics and saw the Intel processor, and this was some kind of, epiphany, where he's moved by the majesty of technology. Well, Bill Gates has the same story. So, I mean, there's copycat Japan maybe, but I think he does that. But the point you make about belief, this unshakable belief in, I know I get it right. Well, he did get it right with Jack Ma. By the way, I did talk to the people. You have the account of the sort of speed dating in Beijing, where he meets Jack Ma and he's moved by this. He has this sort of animal sense that this is the guy and I'm going to invest in. Well, I interviewed 2 people in that group who saw that, were in that meeting, and they were all against investing in Alibaba, other than Masa. Now, I asked somebody who's actually in the Softbank Vision Fund, not Rajiv, who we should come to, the Indian connection. But I asked them to explain, why is it, where does this conviction come from about, I've got the vision, I'm right? And this gentleman, the American, said, the best analogy, and I put it in the book, is Ronald Reagan and Star Wars. I mean, all the experts were telling Ronald Reagan, this doesn't work. It's dangerous. It could upset the whole nuclear balance and everything else. But Reagan said, no, I've got the vision, I know where I want to go, and I'm doing it, and I believe it. That's Masa.
And so I think any entrepreneur knows, has to know how to some extent switch off a bit from reality. We call it obviously the reality distortion field, and also bring people into your own different sense of a future to raise this amount of money. And he's done that, as you described, repeatedly, even after he's lost lots of money over the years. It's also very interesting that it's quite confusing at times between Softbank, the company, Masayoshi Son, the individual, and then these weird companies that he has, like SAB, or no, there's all these different acronyms that MAC, MIC, and he says, oh, 99% of MIC is me, and therefore it doesn't really matter, just think of this company as me. But what was interesting, he's constantly playing the shell game with leverage, and he's pledging his shares in one company to another. It wasn't always that apparent to investors what's going on.
Just on the vision thing, the best quote is from Thomas Edison, which is, vision without execution is hallucination. And Masa sometimes, he can execute. He's got some very talented executives who built up the mobile phone business, etc. But let's come to this rather tricky subject, which is conflict of interest. Masa playing the shell game. He's got private companies, private interests, and the public company. Now, the first time this really was exposed in public was when SoftBank was quoted on the junior stock market. It was preparing to go on the Tokyo Stock Exchange. He'd brought in these tough financial engineers, including a real tough guy from Merrill Lynch called Kitao. Kitao helped him with very important phase, I won't go into this, but in disrupting the Japanese bond market, taking advantage of the guarded, careful financial liberalization introduced by the Japanese government. But in 1997, a book was published, anonymous, of disgruntled Japanese Softbank employees who said, and the book was appropriate, by the way, it was Yell Publishing, Yell, but essentially said SoftBank's crooked and he's double dealing. Masa sued, and there was a big. The crucial point in this book is it identified the private companies, including one called Mac. I think it was probably named after Steve Jobs' computer. Again, copying. But Mac was warehousing loss-making parts of acquisitions which Masa had made in America. This wasn't disclosed. And also Masa was investing alongside SoftBank. And he's done that a lot, and most recently in the options trading, which went all wrong with the NASDAQ whale. But this problem has always been an issue for investors. You know, who's actually liable? How much is he leveraged? And I think it partly accounts for this discount to assets of SoftBank share price.
Right. And it's actually a full-time job trying to understand SoftBank with the many, many different entities that he's created with the SoftBank name over the years. By the way, the logo, I like that detail in the book. The logo of SoftBank, which are these wavy lines, actually comes from a shipping company established by at the beginning of the Meiji Restoration, right? By the Ryoma, yeah. So it looks like a shipping. So he has a kind of like pirate kind of air to him. But I think it's interesting that he does have people who work for him very, very hard, and we'll get to later the Indian cadre, a lot of them ex-Deutsche Bank. But early on, he has employees who have to like pledge money and actually buy shares, borrow money from the company. And of course, when the shares were down, I mean, there were a lot of individuals who could have almost been bankrupt. In the end, they weren't, but it was a close run.
Yeah, he did make them whole. That company, MIC, by the way, MIC, not MICK, because that really would have been dodgy. Yeah, when the company went bankrupt, or it filed for bankruptcy, he made them whole. And by the way, he's got a pretty good track record of making people whole. He's been quite smart. When things go wrong or don't go as well as he promised, for example, the Saudis, he made them whole on WeWork and other stuff. So although he's a pretty sharp shooter, and he's definite, when I spoke to Nikesh Arora, who will come to one of the Indians, the Google guy who Masa hired as a potential successor, when I told him the story of how Masa, as a high school student, he liked running. He did, just remember the stick, kendo, did that, did baseball, but he also was a middle distance runner. And so they did a 10K run, and Masa figured out, because he looked at the map, that there was a shortcut. So he only ran about 7 kilometers. No, he didn't win it, but he came sort of third. And when I told Nikesh this story, he said, "That's the title of your book, The Shortcut."
Yeah, so as you said, he wouldn't have had people follow him all these years if he had, people had been bankrupted, or he had luck in getting back to getting them whole, or winning back people's trust. But he's had to win it back many times, and I think he has that charisma, which is part of it. It's interesting. One thing that came out with my research on Jack Ma was later on in Alibaba's history, the creation of Ant Financial, and how there was a dispute actually between Jerry Yang, Masa, and Jack over how Jack Ma took the Alipay asset out. One of the justifications on the Alibaba side is that Masa didn't really want to cut in the employees enough. Like Alibaba was saying, I'm not sure if this is true, by the way, but they wanted to create more for the employees. So there was a sense that Masa really kept his equity very, very close to his heart. And it's true that Jack Ma gave away quite a lot early on to Goldman and then to SoftBank and others. So there seemed to be an element of sort of stinginess on the SoftBank side, which I think is fair to say is a bit different from Alibaba. But I'm not sure that was the major difference between the two of them. It's interesting to think about the Ma, Masa, and also Musk link. They all know each other. And Ma is quiet right now. But, thinking of the charisma that he has at the political level as well, the international level.
Masa is really tight with his financial interests and equity interests, and you know, well, definitely no successor. He's going to be carried out in a coffin before he gives up. But at one point in the negotiation over in the triangle between Alibaba, Yahoo, and Softbank, Jerry Yang said to him, you know, I feel like I'm your ATM, because he did so well in that negotiation. That was Joe Tsai who told me that story at Alibaba. No, I think he can be really ruthless. So many times he said, I will invest in you. We don't need the money. No, I will invest you. If you don't need the money, everybody needs 100 million, he said to Jerry Yang. And then he said, if you don't take 100 million, I invest it in your competitor. Who are these competitors? I mean, it's really hardball. And he's made a few enemies as a result.
Yeah, he's definitely prone to some threats, as well as some, always investing more than people expected or that they thought that they could even need. So negotiating with him does take some, you to be quick on your feet. But of course, in the book, famously, one nemesis, I suppose, for him is WeWorks. Basically, he just went a bit mad with somebody who he described as sort of a Jesus Christ figure in terms of Adam. He very tall, smoking pot, surfing, Israeli. He just somehow, for Masa, this became like the new Messiah. And he said he saw the new Jack Ma in Adam, but it didn't go so well.
Yeah, I mean, I think Alibaba, which 20 million to then another 80 million, 100 million bet, turns into 140 billion. Not bad. But in a way, it's a curse as well as a blessing, because he's always trying to repeat that kind of success. And he's always looking at founders and saying, who is the next Alibaba? And with Adam Newman, who I had the distinct, memorable experience of sitting next to when the Financial Times, in all its wisdom, decided to make him boldness in business winner of the year, certainly bold, yeah. Well, he is. He's very magnetic, charismatic, and they looked at each other and they had a severe attack of founder syndrome. They really believe. And Masa loves it when you have somebody who says, I'm going to take over the world. And although this was just an ordinary, really, real estate leasing company, just had free food, booze, and a few, armchairs, Masa, and I tell this story, he's on his way to visit Donald Trump. He's supposed to be going around WeWork for 2 hours, and it turns into a 15-minute meeting, and he says, I got to go. And he says, Adam, you come with me. And Adam Newman gets in the car, and he does a few scrawls on the iPad and gives him $4.4 billion. And it's unbelievable. And suddenly, WeWork is worth more than International Hilton. Or Hilton International. And then it gets worse and worse and worse. Yeah. And I have another scene where he goes to China. Didi Chutung comes to Tokyo, and Masa's had this meeting with Didi. Didi's beaten Uber, knocked their socks off, and he then calls in Adam and says, here, look, this man's just beaten Uber, and then he says, I've got a question for you. Who wins in a fight, crazy man or sensible man? And Adam says, crazy man. He says, that's right. So be even crazier. And of course it goes terribly wrong. Maybe COVID didn't help, but the valuations were ridiculous.
You said, this was a big egg on his face, but he did, with the Saudis that he brought in and other from the Gulf, he did make them whole because it was so embarrassing how he'd overpaid on that. But it became a major strain on him personally as well, with pledging his shares. So he, to some extent, almost finished him, but didn't. But that same day, I think that he went to the WeWorks office. He then went up to Trump Tower, right? This must have been, I guess, November 16 November, December. And then he had this bizarre meeting. He went up to meet Trump and then came down to the lobby. And this is hilarious. I remember watching this live.
Well, I kind of like this story because I found out who had got Masa in to be the first big business guy to meet Trump, president-elect, in the Trump Tower. And Steve Schwarzman of Blackstone was one, and the other was this Las Vegas Trump donor, casino billionaire, Sheldon Adelson, whose wife now is donating a lot of money to Trump in the campaign. Anyway, he goes in. They've told him, whatever you do with the president-elect, keep it simple. Said, oh, yes, keep it simple. So how many jobs? 50,000. 50,000. And how many? 50 billion. That's great. So just go in there, and I describe, because I've talked to two people in the meeting, basically, they sit down, and Masa starts talking. He says, I have good news. 50,000 jobs, 50 billion. And Trump goes, that's great. And he looks at his chief of staff and says, can we tweet this? And the chief of staff says, but, I mean, we don't even know where he's going to put the money, which state. Doesn't matter. It's 50 billion. It's good. It's great. Let's tweet. So anyway, the meeting's over fairly soon. And Trump says, I got to do something. He goes into his private bathroom and starts combing his hair, arranging his pin. And then he sees Masa outside and says, hey, let me show you how you do it. And he shows him how to comb the hair for the TV cameras. But Masa doesn't have any hair. So anyway, they go downstairs. This is completely surreal. They go in the elevator, go down, there's masses of reporters, and Trump says, this is the guy who's 50,000 jobs, 50 billion. It's, Masayoshi Son. What do you got to say? And Masa said, well, and he said, that's all right. And then Trump takes over, then walks off. And then one of these American TV reporters says, that's great. You put in now Softbank. It's a bank. No, not a bank. No, it's a technology company. Anyway, surreal, but real.
And another feature of that, I mean, he was actually talking about Foxconn investing, which in eventually they chose Wisconsin. And Foxconn had no idea this was happening. I mean, and I think they called him and said, what the hell are you doing? You're committing us to investing $50 billion. So this is classic Masa. He's just off the cuff, wants to be the center of attention.
Yeah, I think he was including the Sprint money, so he wasn't committing Terry Gao for 50 billion, but Gao had no idea. Because what happened when the TV cameras came out, Masa had his iPad and his papers, so it had Foxconn all over the TV screens. The Saudis had no idea that they were being committed, all this money was being committed. So, yeah, not a good day.
He had to yell at reporters, no, I'm not Terry Go from Foxconn, I'm Masa. What? So it's just like kabuki theater, I suppose, of some kind. But so he has this desire to also be the center of attention, and we're getting some questions in, I'm going to relate some of them as well. Yeah, I think it's important to think about, the cadre of people that he surrounded himself by. 1.1 we thought would be his successor. Again, he has two daughters, which unfortunately in Japan he is a more traditionalist. He doesn't consider them as heirs, although other Japanese firms are successfully bringing their daughters in to inheritance in the business. But in his case, he has built up a relationship with typically Indian bankers from Deutsche Bank. Now, how did that start?
Well, first of all, Rajiv Misra was a Deutsche Bank credit trader, and he then became Masa's personal banker in the early 2000s. And even though Masa had basically lost all that money and is launching a loss-making broadband operation, he's still managing to get a credit line of about $300 million a year from Deutsche Bank through Rajiv Misra. Misra then also does the leveraged buyout of Vodafone Japan, which is the significant, and turns into Softbank Mobile, very successful, gets exclusive distribution of the iPhone from Apple. And Rajiv keeps in touch with Masa. Fast forward to 2013-14, Masa is getting bored. He wants to go back to the tables to invest, as opposed to running very difficult telephone companies or mobile phone companies. And he's looking for money. At the same time, he's looking to kind of broaden his management team. And he's under a bit of pressure to sort of, who's your successor? He'd already said, by the way, which is great, I don't have any successor. Well, what about the daughters? I don't have any successor. Anyway, he chooses Nikesh Arora, and without spoiling all of the book, I talked to Nikesh, who told me this absolutely bizarre, bonkers story. He's being wooed by Softbank. He's at Google. He's the number 4 executive, chief revenue officer. And they agreed to meet in a Japanese restaurant in the Santa Monica Hills, top restaurant, top wine. And Masa and he start negotiating over their contract. But as usual, Masa insists on doing napkin contracts. So all the numbers are on a napkin. This is what he often does. It's a sort of what he calls man's pride. We don't do paper, we do it on a napkin. Anyway, Nikesh described how they were haggling over the package, and there were zeros being put in, X's and exclamation mark. Eventually, this napkin has the number $320 million over 4 years guaranteed. 120 million bonus, 50 million a year. Not bad. Can you imagine what the Japanese thought about that when they heard that contract? Anyway, Nikesh is they're married for 2.5 years, and then it all goes wrong because Nikesh believes that he's going to be the successor, and of course it doesn't materialize. And meanwhile, Rajiv is plotting to take over as the man in charge of the Softbank Vision Fund. He's introduced Masa to Gulf Money, and he gets the job. Great. Rajiv is some people really don't like him. I think he's a charming rogue. He's very, very skilled financial engineer, and he outmaneuvered Nikesh in the SoftBank politics. And Masa, in a funny way, he's very loyal. He never forgot that Rajiv helped him buy Vodafone Japan. And so there's that kind of enduring loyalty. So when this extraordinary plot, which I've got to be careful here for legal reasons, but let's say that Rajiv's hand is somewhere in it, which is essentially to set up a honey trap for Nikesh in Tokyo. Nikesh doesn't fall to the temptation, but Rajiv is out to get him. This is documented in the Wall Street Journal in 2 articles. But Masa just says he's family. He's essentially untouchable. And he stays on all through SoftBank Vision Fund. Incredible story.
So one thing we need to talk about, I think, is AI, and we saw the clip of NVIDIA. Of course, Masa, I think SoftBank is a major shareholder still, even after its IPO in ARM, the originally UK chip design company, which you describe very well in the book, actually, how a Japanese firm was able to buy, one of the European jewels. We had an event here on recently on ASML, the Dutch semiconductor design company. But other than that, ARM is probably Europe's greatest play in this world of semiconductors into AI, but that's now in Masa's hand. But how do you, at the end, you ask him this question, like, what is your legacy? And he's quite modest. He says, well, I'm just contributing in some small way to the future of AI, but he really believes in artificial general intelligence, or artificial hyperintelligence, I think he calls it. So he sums his whole life up as saying, well, I'm going to be playing a small role in AI. I mean, he clearly believes in that. Has he got more planned, or what?
Masa has talked about artificial intelligence for at least 20 years. He's talked about the singularity, that's this Ray Kurzweil term for essentially when robots become, or computers become more intelligent than human beings. And he's talked about how this will change every sector of life, and also, by the way, help Masa to live to the age of 120 or maybe even 130. He said this with a straight face. But when it came to the investing, he basically missed the AI this next turn. He did have a stake of 5% in NVIDIA, but partly because he got into financial difficulty with WeWork, he sold the stake. And I mean, this would have been Masa's next Alibaba. He also had a plan to merge, which is what he was referring to, merge NVIDIA with ARM. But this got blocked by the regulators in China. The US was not keen either, certainly in the Biden administration, and the UK neither. So that didn't come off. He lost out on NVIDIA, and he's basically been desperate. Actually, I'll just say one other thing. The madness of the Softbank Vision Fund and what was going on I go into some detail in the book because it is crazy. You've got investment managers being rated as to how much money they're putting out the door. You know, Herman Narula of Imagine goes over from Tokyo hoping he can get 50 million. Masa just says, take 500 million. He doesn't know what to do with the money. I mean, there's so much waste and ridiculousness going on. And people describe it off the record largely. So Masa misses deep AI. Now he's desperate. This is his fifth comeback, as I said. He is desperately wooing Sam Altman. I'm told, I couldn't put this in the book because I only had one source, that he offered Sam Altman in a meeting 5 billion and then said, take 10 billion. Months later, he contributed 500 million to Series, I think D, I can't remember whether it's D or E, at a valuation of something like 150 billion, OpenAI. I think he has a stake in the other company, Anthropic. Doesn't have a stake in Mistral. And this is going to be in next chapter of the next book, but he's rapidly selling down stakes in these 500 companies. He's selling down a lot of things, or wants to sell, because he wants to put it all into artificial and general intelligence, which he really thinks is the biggest thing. I mean, he's ridden this wave. The big picture here is microchip, internet, mobile, social media, AI. And that's where he's gone.
As you describe in the book, I mean, in Wall Street, you make big money off a small base, or you make small money off a big base. But Masa basically tried to make gigantesque, gargantuan money off a gargantuan base, which was the Vision Fund, which people don't remember, but this was 10 times bigger than anything anybody had imagined. It was 100 billion in funds, mostly from the Gulf. And of course, as you know, as things get bigger, it's harder to get the returns, right, on large bases. But this was his vision. But AI, I guess, is now coming back as something which is that big.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, he talked about having not just one Vision Fund, but 10, $1 trillion. He'd be the biggest in the world, the richest man in the world, the most powerful investor. He'd be like Rothschild times 10, or maybe 20. He wants to get into super AI, artificial super intelligence, and he wants to place himself, in the middle of this revolution. He knows he's not at the forefront, in the vanguard, but he wants to look at, and this is what he's been very good at, the application of technology rather than the invention of technology. So he's not really an innovator, but he's a very smart applicant, applier of technology.
One thing I forgot to mention early on in his early life, I mean, he was one point told that he was going to die. I mean, he basically had hepatitis, and for basically 3 years, he thought he would have a few months to live. So, I mean, the guy has been, seriously challenged, and somehow he would hide that, he would keep... But the other thing in the book comes out is he likes to be at the center of attention. I mean, after the Fukushima earthquake, for example, he took a mayor from Kyushu in the southwest of Japan all the way up to the Fukushima area, I guess, and said, look, we'll take all your people, come move to Kyushu. And people were like, well, no, we live here, and, So, and he also said, well, we're going to shut, Softbank will fund, all this new form of energy. We're going to, which he did launch a venture in new energy, which didn't really work. So, and in the end, he didn't actually fix the telephone network, was what they needed at the moment. So he's a bit of a news hog, right? He likes to get in the character. So my question is now, Trump is back. How is this going to play? Because Japan today doesn't have a charismatic prime minister who plays golf, which we saw before, which was Japan's secret sauce. Is Masa in some way going to be a face for Japan in dealing with Trump, which would make a lot of people nervous in the government?
In general, he stays clear of politics. The Fukushima chapter is a rare example where he's in public, taking a big public position against nuclear power and pro-renewables and saying we've got to change. I mean, he got a very big bloody nose at that time. Although the solar energy business was actually quite successful. The other time he went big public was his plan to merge Sprint, which he bought, loss-making, big problems, although it had good technology. And he wanted to merge it with T-Mobile. He ran straight into the Federal Communications Commission and straight into the opposition of the Obama administration, but got the deal done 7 years later under Trump. And so he has some purchase there. He doesn't have Sheldon Adelson around. He's got Steve Lightfoot. I asked him, look, you've been brilliant at positioning yourself as largest foreign investor in China and through Alibaba, largest in America through Sprint and others at one time. Now that we're having the world economy, it's seeing decoupling, de-risking, didn't you have to choose? And he said, we had to choose. We've chosen the West, not China. Now, he hasn't given up all his business interests in China. There's still some things that are quite secret. But he's had to sell down almost everything in Alibaba. And my understanding is that there was some pressure from the Americans to say, we can't have you buying, he got a lot of trouble with the CFIUS committee, which is the central scrutiny of foreign investment in America for national security reasons. He had problems with that, with Boston Dynamics. He wanted to buy, there were three things that are there. So I think he will probably play it carefully, but he's definitely got his weight on America. That's where his weight of his business is.
Yeah, as you described, he lived in a fairly charmed time of hyper-globalization for 25, 30 years. He was able to invest massively in the US, in China, in India, in Europe. And so now that that world is coming to an end, has come to an end, he does have to make more choices. But at the same time, he has this faith in AI. He has a very positive view of technology overall, that he doesn't see, he talks about how, races won't matter anymore, borders won't matter. But actually, he can't invest heavily in Chinese AI, for example. That's clear. So he is adapting. We're getting questions coming in. If there's any in the room, do ask, raise your hand. But overall, it's, what does he signify for Japan's economic challenges as well? Is he sui generis? He's such a specific individual, specific company. Are there any lessons for Japan as it looks to move, it's moved out of deflation. It's got this benefit, one could say, of, decoupling a little bit, pushing things back to Japan from China. We're seeing the investments in Kyushu from TSMC and so on. What's Masa's role in this, or not?
I think he is a risk taker in a society which is not totally risk averse. But Nikkei bought the Financial Times, and they've been very good owners, hands off. But in terms of you want to do something or take a risk, I mean, they move very carefully. Masa is operating at warp speed, and he is prepared to take risks, gigantic risks. He's prepared to bet the company. And he's also, although he hasn't backed a lot of small companies, he's not really, although he's talked for 30 years about having venture capital play a bigger role in Japan. It's not come off. And when it's in terms of backing startups, he's gone to America, he's gone to Britain, a bit in Europe, and India, certainly India, very important, Israel. And so that's the lesson to me, that if you're going to be an entrepreneur, risk is built in. You're going to fail. And in a culture where failure is seen as disgraceful or humiliating, he has to try. And I think he has really tried to change the mindset.
Christine, you have a question? Or straight back from Washington covering the elections? Maybe you don't want to talk about the elections, but I'll pass you the one working mic. When can you help them?
What would be the relationship between Masa and Elon Musk at this stage?
Mike, here we go.
They're the best of enemies. They're the best of frenemies. So I talk in the book about Masa meeting Musk and trying to persuade him to do a deal whereby Musk went private. Musk take a stake in Tesla. And it doesn't come to anything because essentially there's two gigantic egos and very, very aware of that kind of rivalry, Masa being number one in Japan. Now, in 2016, 17, Musk was nowhere as big as he is now, where he's essentially the Trump whisperer and the man who's done SpaceX, etc. So I don't think that the two have gelled. They're just rivals. So I think he'll keep his distance. I don't think that, I better be careful here because I don't know for sure, but I think Masa would use other avenues to get to Trump, not go through Musk. And by the way, but I should ask you that, Christine. I mean, how long is Trump going to put up with this grandstanding by Musk? Somebody's going to say to Trump, you know, you're the president. I wonder.
Yeah, on that Musk and Masa, also the Ma connection, we saw Jack Ma and Elon Musk together before Jack was sort of deplatformed at an AI event. And there was no moderator, and it didn't go very well. I mean, so very different. I mean, Musk was going on about Mars, and Jack was trying to bring it back to Earth. And it's interesting to think about when you get people of this ilk together that don't necessarily get on. And one thing in your book you talk about is also that, I mean, Jack Ma left the board of Softbank, I think in the summer of 2020, I think before 19. So yeah, before his sort of run-in really with the government there. So there was some concern, particularly I guess with the Vision Fund, that Ma, even, you know, Jack Ma, who is a very ambitious person, saw that Masa was going a bit nuts basically with Vision Fund and got off the board, as well as Yanai-san. It's very interesting, the founder of Smart Retail. Hope you're all wearing Uniqlo here as the weather's getting colder, a little plug. But it's quite interesting that the stock code for fast retail is one number less than the stock code for Softbank, because Yanai-san of Uniqlo, that company went public just before Softbank. And the two are actually, and I've met Yanai-san, also very interesting fellow, but he also was trying to be the older person in the room to Masa, saying you're going a bit.
Yeah, I'll tell a story about, because I didn't use everything from the interview with Yanai-san. Yanai-san wanted to meet Masa, this young guy, in 1994, and he wanted to use him in one of Fast Retailing's adverts. Masa said he was too busy. So Yanai got him in, talked to him, and then they both went public. Yanai-san then joined the Softbank board, and I asked him why, and he said, because it really would have been a bad thing for Japan to lose this man who's it's come from nothing, a startup. Japan needs someone like Masa. But then I said, well, what did you experience on the board? And he said, roughly translated, the guy's a total egomaniac. I mean, I had to tell him that he just could not dress up as Elvis Presley. You're talking about a showman. And then I said, tell me more. And Yanai-san, because it was all being translated, he looked at me. I'd interviewed him before, so he knew me. And he said, in business, you have to deal in clean water. Masa deals in polluted water. That's very profound. I said, what's the example? Do you have an example? He said, yes. In Osaka at the G20 meeting, Putin went up to him and stroked his shoulder. Terrible. Terrible.
So Yanai-san is a fascinating individual who hopefully will be subject of future books, deservedly with Uniqlo's story. But yeah, Masa is really one of a kind. I think it's pretty clear to say. I think we have any more questions in the room? Otherwise, we're going to take some from the floor. From the online room, which is basically, we didn't really touch much on robotics, but AI is one more broad thing that he's actually, he famously brought the Pepper robot into Softbank stores and so on. But Japan is facing a depopulation problem. Did he talk much about this vision on demographics as well and what's going to be happening? Or?
I think I was a bit light on this. Pepper was important in terms of marketing the idea that I'm with the future. And also, it was a useful thing for the Softbank mobile, have these robots, Pepper turning up, wandering around the floor. He did bring Pepper to the Sun Valley Media Conference, where trillions of dollars are walking around, all the big tech companies. But it never made any money. Masa, I think in passing, we did talk about the demographic challenge. It's serious in Japan, it's even more serious in Korea. And people do talk about robots as assistants, but I haven't quite seen that level of sophisticated product yet where I think we've got a ways to go.
Just to sum up, as you said in the end of the book, he basically, in life there are many levels of reality, many shades of truth. What you see is not always what you get with Masa. But I think you got as close, as anybody to actually concluding correctly that it is unknowable to some extent.
Well, I just wanted to tell people about this experience of, how do you get to Masa? Because he didn't want this book written. It wasn't authorized. And the first time I went to Tokyo, they just told me he was too busy. And when I said, well, I've come all the way from London, he said, well, the weather's very nice. And I think they were just testing me. So I didn't get angry. I kept my cool. I wasn't working as editor of the Financial Times. You learn a bit of humility. But I did say, I'm serious, and I'm not going away. So I'm now going to Kyushu, and I'm going to go all around his schools. I'm going to see the family home. I'm going to go to Shimonoseki. They came over from Busan on the boat. And I'll see you in 2 months, and I hope to then do the interview. Actually, so I'm serious, and I was ready to do the Lyndon Johnson technique, except I'm not big enough. Now, what happened then was I was better prepared. I'd been to Kyushu. I tasted the seafood. And Masa was really impressed because I corrected his narrative on a couple of times. And he, oh, guys, you know this. Oh, amazing. Oh, patting me on the head. And we're in this room, this gigantic room with this table that Masa is at. It's almost as long as Putin's in the Kremlin. And I'm at the end. I'm like, Masa, and then we did another interview. And then he said, I want you to meet my father. You can meet. I said, can I meet your father? He said, yes. Come to the opening of the baseball season. Come to Fukuoka to meet because he owns a softball team, a baseball team, Fukuoka Hawks. So I said, yeah, fine, I'll do that. And then I did what every editor, top journalist wants to do, which is you made me go to Japan and you didn't see me, so I'm going to get my own back on that. So I'm just waiting. So when I had to ring up and I said, well, I can't come to the opening of the baseball season because I'm seeing the Prime Minister, Kishida. Anyway, I said, but can I see his father? So I did. I went to the family home. He's 87, and we talked about Masa. And this guy is he's like a gambling. He's got an edge of the underworld about him. But he's charismatic. He told me how he built up his pachinko business, how he fixed the pins so that everybody would win. And everybody all around town's going, this is the greatest pachinko parlor. Everybody goes in, and then he puts the pins back again. I mean, all that stuff. But he also, anyway, that was a great experience. So when the last interview with Masa, I'm in the Softbank building headquarters. We've done this long interview. We've had couple of difficult questions about WeWork and stuff, which he didn't really like. But, I'm trying to give him, I'm trying to be the doctor treating the patient, good bedside manner and all that. And at the end he says, okay, it's finished, all right, okay. I want to show you something. So then he took me into his private dining room, which is this ridiculous, giant room. I mean, it's the size of this room times 4 at the top of the building. I mean, it's enormous. It may be times 3. And it's got all this artwork on it. It's got rock pools, trees, which have been each leaf hand painted. Then there's a podium, and he's got his favorite wine, Romani Conti. Yeah. La Tâche. So I see this, and he says, well, you can't write anything about this. What? But it was to seduce me, but I said, why not? And he said, because you're a journalist. I said, I'm not a journalist, I'm an author. I got away with it.
We more than got away with it. It's a fantastic book. I think we have, for the online audience and for here, hopefully we're flashing up QR codes so you can order it at your local bookshop or on the American one. We all know. We have some copies here we'll give to some of our patrons tonight. But I'd like to thank Lionel for this incredible book, firstly, that we should all read, and for these inside stories that you've been sharing with us about this fascinating man, an unusual man, but somebody who's been at the center of the action for decades now, and probably still got a bit to go still, and particularly in light of what's just happened in Washington. We're going to be seeing more of these bros changing our lives in ways that we may or may not like, but it's a big fat reality. And for Japan, it's a very unusual story, I think, which I think helps us understand Japan, which may not be the direction that Masayoshi Son wants to take it, but it reveals a lot about Japan as well, about the world. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for joining us in Paris. Thank you, everybody, for this evening. And thanks to our co-sponsors for tonight. Thank you.